Well, welcome to our Brown Bag series. This is a series where we get to talk about research, and we are lucky today to have Peter Geldrich with us, who is the assistant professor of clarinet here at VSU. He got his master's at the University of Florida, and I was reading through the things that you've done, and I'm very impressed. You have played with the Valdosta Symphony, the Albany Symphony. The people you have studied with over the years are just phenomenal. Uh, we're thrilled to have you here at VSU to begin with, but
Thank you.
also on our lunch broadcast. And so you agreed to come in and tell us about music and research because one of the issues that we have with the council, because you sit on our council too, is the fact that we all have different ways of doing research. And so getting that out is part of what we are trying to do with this. So at this time, I welcome you and I'd like to turn it over to you.
Well, thanks. And it's great to be here. I think one of the things that is so interesting about music, and maybe something that people don't necessarily know right off the bat, is how diverse music is. It really intersects with a lot of other disciplines and research areas. So my primary areas are in performance, because all of the music faculty, or at least all the music faculty that teach instruments, like I do, I'm the clarinet professor here at BSU. We have violin professors and piano professors and tuba professors. We're all what are known as artist faculty. And so we're expected to be performing regularly within the community here in Valdosta, but also nationally and internationally. And so I regularly travel all over the world giving concerts. And so I'm performance-based, but then also I have a research specialty in pedagogy as an applied teacher. I teach any student at BSU who wants to learn to play clarinet. And so I do a lot of research in the pedagogy area, trying to help these students understand the mechanics of the instrument, also the mechanics of their bodies. Because playing any instrument, even if it's singing using your voice, requires utilizing muscle groups in a very unique way. And so pedagogy is often intersecting with things like kinesthesiology and anatomy and things like that. But beyond just the performance and pedagogy, we have music history. I have a doctoral cognate in music history, and so a lot of my research also kind of goes into that realm because it's a major interest of mine. And music history, of course, intersects with the history of civilization. Every society throughout human history has had its own form of music and politics and everything else always is intertwined. Speaking of societies, we have ethnomusicology. I teach a world music class here, which is in the discipline of ethnomusicology, which is the study of music as applies to anthropology. So actually really, and if you're an ethnomusicologist, one of your primary forms of research is actually to go out and live in these societies, whether it's in the Andes Mountains in South America, or in Africa, or in Polynesia, or China, or anywhere else. Go there and live and learn the language and actually learn the musical language of that particular society, so that you then can share it with the rest of your discipline, with the rest of the musical world. So that's a whole fascinating, totally new world of music. We also have music therapy, which is very much intersecting with neurology, with psychology. If you know Oliver Sacks, who's a great author and a neurologist, he's very interested or was in the potential benefits of musical therapy in treating a myriad of ailments and whatnot. And then there's even music business, and it goes on and on and on. And so we just really intersect with practically every single other discipline you can think of. And so as a musician, one can really choose to branch off into all these different areas. And that's often what happens. Oftentimes you get someone like myself who majors in music performance, majors in playing clarinet, but then like, hey, I really enjoyed my music history classes. Maybe I'll actually go into music history and we'll get a degree in music history or music theory. That's actually a discipline I didn't even mention. Music theory is another primary area of music, which really gets into analyzing a musical score. Music a theory is almost like if you're a literature major or a professor and you get a graduate degree in that, you're learning how, what the interpretation of a novel or a play is, not just the enjoyment of the language, but what's the symbolic nature of what the author, what the characters, who the characters are, and what they're doing. Music theory really is about that. Like, how is a composer choosing to construct a piece of music, and what does that mean to the audience, really analyzing and digging into the interpretation of a piece of music. So there's just so many different disciplines, and so oftentimes you get a music student who just comes in playing an instrument or singing, but then finds a fascination with any one of these other areas and very well may choose to go into that. And in fact, we don't offer a music therapy program at BSU, but oftentimes our music students will get a minor in psychology with the purpose of then going to a program that offers a graduate degree in music therapy. And so our music classes, their understanding of music theory, their understanding performance nature, and then branching off into psychology really blends well with music therapy and prepares them then for a graduate degree in music therapy and then a career in that, which is one that's really growing. It's one that I think a lot of scientists and doctors, as well as musicians, are really excited. We're kind of at the forefront of really unearthing all of the possibilities, the ways that music can benefit people.
Let me get to turn this back on. That's fascinating. I mean, I honestly had not, music is not my thing. I don't play any instruments or anything. But I had kids that went into music. And I find it fascinating because when they were doing it, even just as you said, the physicality of playing the music. I remember that my daughter had to choose a secondary instrument and she chose the oboe. And she said the first time she learned, the professor had to put like pillows around because it took so much air to figure it out. So that's something I hadn't really thought about. Can you speak a little bit more on that?
Yeah, sure. So you mean the actual sort of anatomical nature of playing? Yeah. So that's something, I say this to my students a lot, that at no time in human history or in evolution has any human being been asked to coordinate the muscle groups that a clarinet player or an oboist has to coordinate, because you manipulate pitch with your fingers, which is something we do all the time, right? We type and do things like that. You have to peel an orange. So we use our digits a lot throughout human history. So the movement of fingers is fine, but then we have to coordinate with our airstream and with our tongues. And that's something which is very odd. And I cannot think of any other discipline, any other act in human history that has required a human being to coordinate each individual digit with the movement of tongue, because the way we articulate in music is actually very much like diction. If you think about speaking, you're creating all of these different syllables, consonants and vowels and whatnot. Articulation in music is much the same way, and it's much the same process, but imagine every time you speak, moving a different combination of fingers. And now you're getting to what being an oboe player is like, what being a clarinet player is like, what being a saxophone player is like. And because it's so new, because it's so not new, we've been doing it for centuries, of course, but because it's so new to each individual person, and because it's not really, it hasn't had any evolutionary function. If you think about sports, things like throwing a baseball, or something like that, there's lots of similarities with throwing a rock at like prey, or throwing a spear. These are large muscle groups that the human body has been developing for generations after generation after generation. But coordinating tongue and finger with airstream is something that's so outside the realm of what our normal everyday bodies are trained to do, that it requires very special training and very thoughtful training. And that's why there's a lot of research where we're sort of looking into how best to utilize these muscle groups, how to avoid tension. One of the major issues that comes along with mastering an instrument is undue tension, which naturally happens because it's such a weird thing, sticking a clarinet into your embouchure, your mouth, and then blowing and articulating and moving fingers. The body rebels against that. And it oftentimes creates all this tension. And so we have to teach ourselves and then teach our students how to avoid this tension so that we're able to manipulate all these small muscle groups in a very conscious way.
That's amazing. Let me ask you this. I heard from someone one time that the way they decide when you're in fifth grade what instrument you're going to play has a lot to do with your mouth, or your bite, and all that. Is that the case? Do we look at the physical features for that?
Yeah, that's interesting. That is sort of, I would say, an old school approach. I think, just like anything else, we are discovering that people are capable of a lot of things. But I think there was just this a assumption that if you're small, you won't have the breath support to play a tuba. Or if you're very large, maybe your fingers won't be able to manipulate a flute or a piccolo well. But the thing is, we really can train our bodies to do a lot of things. Now it is true that certain body types might have a more difficult time. But my perspective and my approach is that if any student, whether it's college age or a grade school or middle school age student, has a passion for an instrument, if they really want to play an instrument, I think we probably could teach them. Someone could teach them to do it well, and I don't think we should stifle that interest. But it is true that I do think physicality does come into it, and some people are maybe more physically adept, might have an easier time learning an instrument because of certain shape of an oral cavity or size of hands. Certainly, a great example of this is the piano. The piano requires, in some piece of music, a large spread of hands. You might need to do an interval. An interval in music is the distance from like a low note to a high note, right? If you go, ah, that's a large interval. And I have to manipulate my vocal cords to do it. On a piano, you have to actually have a large spread of your fingers. So if you have small hands, there's no way to practice to increase your hand size. And so there are just some things in music that you may not be able to do exactly the way it's printed, perhaps. But the thing is, we've come up with ways you might need to what's called roll a chord, break, rather than play 2 pitches or 3 pitches simultaneously. You might need to do them one after the other in a very fast sequence so that it almost has the sound of happening simultaneously, but you're not able to you don't have the size hands to simultaneously play those. And so that's one example where the size of one's hands can actually be debilitating to some aspects of music performance. But that being said, there are plenty of amazing pianists who have small hands, and they just learn strategies, and they're taught strategies to overcome that.
Well, and I would imagine that having to learn those different strategies would work well in other situations too, just to think about how to overcome the problems and all that. With my 2 daughters, one of the older one played the flute and the piccolo, and the younger one played the saxophone. And then she liked the alto sax, and then the bigger one. And they always got into the bigger instrument, who had to carry what, how heavy they were.
Right. That's always an issue. Yeah, the piccolo is one of the best instruments for being portable. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Well, I want to switch gears a little bit, and for those students who might be interested in music therapy. I find that fascinating because I know there's been a lot written for people with autism or people with other issues, even just so many of our people have anxiety from COVID and that we've been going through. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about the use of music in those situations.
Sure. Well, so this actually does intersect a little bit with one research area I just started to get into, and that's meditation. I'm taking this from an approach as a performer and a pedagogue, and trying to help my music students or any music students overcome anxiety related to music performance, because it's one of those things where we through no fault of our own, oftentimes develop a sort of fight or flight response to performance. I think this is actually very common across humankind, in that fear of public speaking is one of the biggest fears. Well, if you think about it, if you're a music performer, you have that kind of situation often, right? We don't necessarily perform every day, but I perform, maybe at least during non-COVID times, once a month. Performances have kind of dwindled a little bit, but during a normal year, I probably do a performance once a month. That's a regular period of time, getting up on stage with an audience, giving you their full undivided attention. The spotlight is on you. And you've put a lot of effort into learning a piece of music. And so you kind of develop this mindset that a lot is riding on it. People are going to judge you based on the quality of that performance. And I think this is true for lecturing, for public speaking, giving presentations and conferences, all sorts of stuff like that. And there's been a very recent, as in the past decade or so, interest in the effects that meditation can have for easing anxiety. And so that's something I've started to research, and I actually did an interview just 2 weeks ago now with an author and meditation specialist named Martin Borisson. I actually have his book. He wrote a book called One Moment a Meditation, which I came across just because I'm reading a lot about meditation just as part of research. I'm just trying to kind of get a broad perspective on it at first. And that book, the One Moment Meditation, kind of takes the reverse approach to what normal thinking on meditation is, which is that you kind of start small, meditate for 5 minutes or so to kind of learn different techniques, and then expand, right? The goal is to be able to sit and find calm and peace and meditate for a half an hour, or maybe a whole weekend trip or something. Martin Borison's approach is to start with 1 minute, just meditate for 1 minute, and do that for a long time, and try to see if you can get yourself into a calm, peaceful mindset, focused mindset in 1 minute's time, and then try to take it even less, do less than a minute. And so you essentially count breaths. How many breaths does it take within 1 minute? And then once you get very comfortable with that 1 minute, reduce the number of breaths. So maybe it's like 20 breaths in and out in 1 minute. Then do 18 breaths, because you have an inhale and an exhale. So it's always by two. And for a while, do 18 breaths, and then do 16. And so forth and so on. And the process is to eventually get down to just a 1 breath cycle, where you can find a way to release your anxiety and find a way to find focus in just a 1 breath cycle. And I was really interested in this because in music, there's constantly breathing. Even if you play a string instrument or a piano, you have notes, you have a flurry of musical phrases and notes, but then you have rests. There's always silence involved in music. And if you could find that calm, if you could be able to reset if you could train yourself to get that in 1 breath, that to me would be a very powerful thing, because anxiety can creep in a spur of a moment. And so if we could train ourselves to release that anxiety in a spur of a moment also, then that could be a very profound thing. And so that's something I'm researching now, and actually hoping to publish my interview with him in various different journals. But also I want to gave presentations and articles for the College Music Society about the benefits from a pedagogical end on should we be incorporating the training of meditation into our music training so that students are not just learning to focus on what's going wrong, because that's what we do in our practice. When we're practicing music, we are hyper focused on what can I do better. And that's good until you get on stage. And then that's debilitating. And that's where the anxiety comes in. And so I'm, my thinking is that there could be great benefit to training both, training students to be able to be instructive on recognizing their own faults, recognizing how to play a piece of music better, but then also at the same time training themselves to be able to shed that analytical mind. And if they're training to do both, they might be able to then better on stage let the judgment and the analysis kind of pass by. And that's something a meditation is very good at training, from what I am reading and whatnot. Now that sort of deviated from your question a little bit, because I know I sort of went into music. Actually, it's actually kind of the opposite, because music for us can cause anxiety and tension. But as you were pointing to, for the non-musician, music can actually be a form of release in itself and can relieve anxiety. And that is a powerful thing also. One of the really interesting things, and this is not my area of specialty, I'm not a music a therapist, but this is something that I am fascinated in, and I have read some things about it. But one thing that I find fascinating is the way music works on the mind. And this is so apparent with people with Alzheimer's. My wife's father died of Alzheimer's disease, and I've known a couple other people who have had Alzheimer's disease. And music, I have found, and I'm pretty sure other people have found this too, is one of the last things to leave the mind. So my wife's father couldn't remember her name at some point, his own daughter's name or his wife's name or his son's name. But if you played an Elvis Presley song, he would sing along. He would remember all the words to an Elvis Presley song because it had been with him his whole life. And music imprints itself on so many different aspects of the brain. There's so many cognitive connections that result from learning music, and not learning an instrument necessarily, but just singing a song. And music that is part of our lives for a long time. And so it is being used as a form of therapy in nursing homes because it can bring such joy for people that are struggling, who are depressed because they recognize the loss of abilities, the loss of cognitive function. Playing them a song from their youth, playing them a song that they love, you can see the joy come right back into their eyes. And so that is such a profound therapy in that sense. And I think that's the kind of thing that music therapy is going for, healing, not necessarily healing people per se, but giving relief of pain, whether it's psychological pain, or I think there's even some studies showing it can even relieve physical pain because of that, sparking joy and things like that. So it is a very powerful thing.
Now, I'm hoping that you put together, I know not to add one more thing to your plate, but it seems to me like that would make a fascinating class or perspectives course to teach all of our students about the value of music. Not only, I love the meditative idea, to be able to calm yourself faster. And with so many things going on with our students, not just this year with COVID, but everything that they face, getting out and getting the job, going for the interview, going for graduate school, the amount of stress is just unbelievable. And it would be wonderful to be able to study that, but then to flip it around on the other side and talk about the beauty that it does take. My daughter had a case where she was student teaching, and there was a young man, I guess he was about 6, 7, in music class. He never spoke. And
Wow.
her husband brought in the tuba, played the tuba, and left it there because it was heavy. And the next time the young man came into class, he actually walked over and said tuba. And it just, to me, that's it's such a powerful thing. I think a lot of people think, oh, they're doing music, they just go and play band and play, but there's so much more to it. And I love this aspect of the idea that it's the last thing that stays in your mind with
Yeah.
Alzheimer's. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it is, and it's incredibly powerful to see that in action. Incredibly powerful to see someone that no longer speaks because they can't find the words, and yet they can sing. They actually are able to retain the ability to sing, or maybe in very far gone cases, hum a melody, but they're still audiating, and that that's actually creating joy. You just can feel that that's giving them a sense of both peace, but also happiness, just finding that connection with something in the outside world, something from their past, something from their memories. You can just see it in their eyes, and I've seen that with a few different people, and it really is a powerful thing.
That's fantastic. I think it would be nice. I know that we have our different colleges everywhere, but it would be really fun to get together people from different disciplines to even have a discussion about this, so that there is more understanding amongst people of the role of music. It's not, I mean, it is fun. It's just for fun, but it's so many other things that it links
Yeah.
to.
I
Um,
think you're absolutely right. I would love to have some kind of joint a panel between like a psychology and neuroscience, or medicine, because I would like to know more about if this is just me speaking about just things I've read in books, things I've read in articles, but I've not done any kind of deep research project into this. But I would be fascinated, and so I would love to kind of join be a part of a panel where I'm able to kind of hear the perspective from a neuroscientist, from a psychologist about other stuff. I think that would be fascinating.
oh, I do too. Maybe we'll get that set up next year when
Yeah,
we can actually be back together.
right, right.
Yeah, we one of the things I teach is on the Caribbean a lot, and I have one article I always throw in there, mostly for people in music because there's a lot of music theory in there, but it talks about the religious angle behind the Caribbean music and the calling into being of the Orishas, um, and I think again people often forget that there is some real spirituality, some religious ideology that's built on music itself, and so yeah, I think the more we cross over and sort of look at these different aspects would be wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. And what you're talking about there, that's in the realm of ethnomusicology, and absolutely just about every kind of spiritual practice involves some kind of musical performance. I cannot think of a single religion that doesn't really include. Now, it may not call it music. For much of the Islamic world, they actually have a very distinct separation between music, which is seen as purely secular, and sounds and chanting and whatnot. The reading of the Quran is often done in a way that to our ears would be very musical, but because it's sacred, they don't call it music. But the Arabic world has a very rich music, language and all that stuff. But they just kind of make those distinctions. But from our perspective, every religion I can think of involves, music in their spiritual practice, in helping to facilitate transcendence. Something about the performance of music, I think, makes people feel like they are getting closer to a form of spirituality when you're actually involved in religious practice, and that's a truly fascinating thing to study, also.
Yeah, Houston Smith was the first one to record the Tibetan throat singers.
Oh yeah.
When he found them, he found this old uh, gosh, it's one of those really old timey recorders. And I've always been fascinated with the practice of the Tibetan throat singers and how that occurs because they shouldn't be able to do it. They should not be able to hit those two, those different notes at the same time.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's getting back into the anatomy. That's the sort of pedagogy, because you're right. There are very few human beings on the planet or cultures that have trained people to utilize their vocal cords in that way. You have Mongolian kume singing is a similar kind of thing, but it's getting multiphonics, getting multiple pitches out of the human voice. And it's a technique which is one of the most difficult things to learn to do. But you do have distinct cultures that have, for a long time, have a long history of training to be able to do that. And it gets into the anatomy, it's into pedagogy. And I'm sure the Tibetan monks wouldn't think of it as musical pedagogy, but that's really what it is. It's learning how to physically use your vocal cords in a unique way that very few people on the planet feel a need to do, and therefore very few people on the planet are capable of doing. Just like very few people could sing the Queen of the Night aria by Mozart because it's so high, right? It requires such rigorous training to just achieve those notes within the human voice. It's the exact same thing with Tibetan chanting or Mongolian kume singing, just a totally different soundscape.
Well, I've been taking up your time. I want to open it up and see if Katie or Danielle has any questions for you at this time. Anything that occurred to you all?
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been a fascinating discovery into an area that I know very little about, but now I want to kind of dive some more into. For your students and for all the students at VSU, is there any advice you have for either just diving into research, getting into research areas, or enhancing the time they have? We all have limited time in the day, but how do you get all the research or training you want to get done and achieve what you want to achieve? If any advice you might have on that area.
Yeah, well, I think especially for students, the first thing to realize is that music has so many areas that you can branch into. I think a lot of times students take a music theory class and they're thinking, okay, this is going to let me better understand the music I am playing. And I'll take a music history class, like, okay, this will allow me to understand the music of Beethoven or the music of Mozart or Bach or whatnot, and not realize that if they really have a passion for it, there's nothing stopping them from actually digging deeper into those subjects. I think a lot of times students think that these courses we teach, music theory, music history, music education, music pedagogy, are means to an end. But they can actually be wonderful ends to themselves. They can be wonderful tentacles or branches for them to really explore. And music students, I find, and Dr. Lovern, you probably can attest to this, that we probably don't have that many music students that submit research papers. And there's no reason not, because this is such a broad area and there's so much research that can be done. And I think students, there's this perception, I think both within the music world and outside, that music is fun, that music is learning to play an instrument, learning to perform a piece, and it is that. But there's, as we're sort of discussing here, there's so many fascinating areas that we actually need people to branch out into. There are new discoveries to be made. There are new composers. If you think about the history of even Western music, which is just one small little slice of music history, it's been going on for a few centuries. And we think we have a lot of composers between your Bach and Vivaldi and Mozart and Beethoven and Brahms, Tchaikovsky. Oh my God, it goes on and on. Think of how many composers we don't actually have recordings of, that the manuscripts were never actually published. For every one Bach or every one Mozart, there are dozens of other composers that never got the recognition. And we're now, a really interesting area are, what about all these female composers that just by the birthright of being one gender rather than another, music was a hobby? Well, guess what? Most likely they're probably just as good as their brothers or their husbands and whatnot. And so they're all out there somewhere in somebody's attic or in a church, basement or something, are manuscripts that have never been published, they've never been analyzed. And so there's actually a lot of research that still can unearth a lot of music history, a lot of things in music theory to analyze works that have never been, we never actually shined the light on in that kind of way. Recordings, in music lives in music performance, but if it's recorded, it then can last longer. So we should be recording lots of works that have never actually been documented in that way. And then, of course, in the area of medicine, we don't even know the limits. And so we need our students to act on their curiosity, because our students are smart, they're curious, and so we just need them to kind of actually go down the rabbit hole a little bit more and follow these interests.
Now that's super interesting, because this kind of touches into my area, because I'm one of the librarians at VSU, and one of the things I'm always constantly thinking about is our archive of knowledge, especially when we've moved to electronic formats, and how to preserve the digital collection, especially when we're producing essentially more than we've ever produced as far as information and creativity before. But electronic media is very fragile. And, we can just, if you think about Twitter itself, all the information stored in there and people discussing each other, all these different historical events can be lost in a moment. So for recording music or recording these kinds of things that you've been talking about, how do you think would be best to either record, or who would you say, I found this information, or I have my own music? Who do you send that to kind of archive it, do you think?
Yeah, well, for one thing, the Smithsonian is, an amazing resource, because they have tons and tons and tons of recordings. For one thing, anything that's actually been copyrighted, anything that's actually been specifically published and made a sound recording of, that exists there, at least within the United States. But also they have all sorts of just non-published recordings of folk songs. There was a whole initiative under FDR to go around the country and record folk songs and things like that. But those actually haven't necessarily been published, and so there's actually research where people could access those and get permission to then come up with actual copyrighted, like, commercial recordings of that. There's now we're in this amazing world of new technology that recording yourself has never been easier. You don't necessarily need to have a record label have interest in you, because record labels largely don't see most people as being profitable. And so that's been one roadblock, one barrier to getting recorded is, well, who's going to finance it? Who's going to pay for that recording? And so if a record label doesn't see you, random clarinet player from BSU, as being a moneymaker, they won't do it. But now we have the technology to do that ourselves, just on your computer, and getting a professional quality recorder. And then you could actually self-publish on a website and stuff. And I think the important thing about preserving stuff is to have different mediums. And so if there is a digital copy, that's great until something crashes and disappears. But if you have that on an actual physical compact disc, then you can download that. A lot of libraries have these LP record collections, and a lot of times they actually get rid of those. They'll donate them or whatnot. But I would love it if libraries would actually have an initiative before they get rid of their LPs, which are wonderful historical archives, wonderful historical documents of some of the world's greatest performers from the early 1900s through the mid 1900s. Before they actually get rid of those, try to digitize them first, so that they are preserving a copy within their digital archives. And then LPs are heavy; they take up a lot of space. So I recognize the need and desire to kind of get LP records off of the shelf, but they are incredible historical artifacts of performances. And so we need to be kind of expanding those, having those exist in multiple mediums, the original LP form, the compact disc form, and then a digital copy. And I think if we have these musical performances existing in different mediums, then we're more likely to be able to preserve them for as many generations as possible.
I'm going to have to break in here and say, well, it's got to be vinyl all the way.
I like vinyl. And vinyl records are making a comeback. I find vinyl records have a better shelf life than compact discs that so easily get scratched. Vinyl records can get scratched too, but I find CDs more easily get scratched and damaged.
Yeah, I love my vinyl collection, but then I'm fairly old, so. Well, we are running short of time, but I do want to give you a chance to say something. If there's something that we haven't covered that you really want students to know, I want to give you the opportunity to go through that.
Yeah. We covered a lot of stuff. The one thing about music that I think is great, but it also requires a lot of effort, is that a musical work really is a collaboration between a composer and an artist like myself. And so I think we oftentimes think of the work of art as the score that the composer wrote symbols down on, but really music doesn't exist in score form. Really, that's just symbology. That's just instructions. It's a blueprint. And the work of art itself only exists within that performance. And so and I think the first thing I would say, because we're talking about research, is that music performers at the professional level, I think they should be considered researchers who are just as serious as others, because it's our job to share the work of art, the artifact of that score with the entire world, because it really does not exist in any tangible, or I guess a tangible way, but in a comprehensible way, in an understandable way to the public at large, until it's revealed through music performance. It's just the way if like you had a Russian novel and you want to share that with an English speaking audience, it needs to be translated. And that's what we are. We are translators for music. Is a language that everybody understands. Everyone has a feeling of rhythm, an understanding of pitch and melody. It's why we're able to hum songs that we hear one time, or sing in the shower stuff. It's something that really is intrinsic to human nature, but it does require that translation. And so the aspect of performance really does require research. It requires analysis. It requires a lot of practice, but also collaboration, because oftentimes those performances are collaborative acts where you kind of sit down and make very clear decisions about how you want to phrase things, what notes within those symbols to actually bring out for people to hear, and what should be accompaniment, what should be background, and things like that, how to shape and create colors. And so all of these things are done at the artist level, and it's us trying to be as true to the artifact itself, to the musical score itself. So that's the first thing. Is I think oftentimes, both in the music world and the non-music world, there's a thinking that performance is not research or not scholarship, that it's fun, which it is, and it's a wonderful thing that we hopefully I'm getting across that I'm really passionate about it, and I really love all aspects of it. So it is a lot of fun, and that's why I'm in it. But there's a lot of effort and research that goes in any performance. I'm spending months and months and months really unearthing as much meaning as possible into that musical score. And then the other big takeaway is that we will understand and appreciate music. And I think the world, I think America specifically, needs to appreciate music more. I think we're getting away from the importance of music in our education, in the K through 12 level especially. But I think that there should be a broader understanding about how music intersects with every aspect of our life. And therefore, if you're not researching it, if you're not actually digging in and finding the value of music, not just as a performance art, but as it intersects with history, as it intersects with medicine and psychology and all these things, you're actually doing a disservice to all those other disciplines also. And so musicians, we need to understand that we actually can help society by really digging in and unearthing these things and showing the correlations. And I think the rest of society also should, hopefully will understand that music is vital to every single other area of our disciplines.
Well, I couldn't think of a better way to end this. I've learned so much, and I do hope that we get more in undergraduate research from the music department, because it's a vast untapped resource that we have here. And
Yeah.
I hope that this and other things like it will encourage your students to come out and share what they know with us.
I hope so too.
Well, I thank you for taking your valuable time and coming and talking to us. I loved it. We'll probably call you back because there's still so much to learn.
Great.
I do hope you have a good rest of the day, and with any luck, we'll see you soon.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.